The desperate call. The crystalline spires of Zephyros Prime gleamed under the light of twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the panic that gripped the peaceful world below. In the highest tower of the planetary capital, the Zephyrian High Council, gathered in emergency session, their translucent blue forms shimmering with distress patterns that had not been seen for over 1,000 years. Chancellor Vexandra stood at the center of the circular chamber, her forearms gesturing frantically as holographic displays showed the devastating reality they faced. Red markers indicated fallen colonies, entire worlds that had gone silent over the past 6 months. The Crimson Horde, a savage alliance of warrior species, had swept through their sector of the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in their path. The Outer Rim territories are completely lost, Vexandra announced, her melodic voice trembling with barely contained fear. 17 colonies, over 2 billion souls. The Horde shows no mercy, takes no prisoners. They strip worlds bare and move on to the next target. Councillor Threnaxi, eldest among them, raised his primary hand. His ancient form bore the scars of the last great war their people had fought nearly a millennium ago. What word from the Galactic Federation? Surely they cannot ignore such wholesale slaughter. The Federation debates while worlds burn, spat Councillor Mira Lin, her younger voice sharp with frustration. They speak of diplomatic solutions while the Horde's crimson ships darken our skies. By the time they act, there will be nothing left of our civilization to save. The chamber fell silent except for the soft harmonics that accompanied Zephyrian distress. Their species had evolved beyond warfare centuries ago, choosing the path of knowledge, art, and peaceful exploration. Their defensive capabilities, while adequate against pirates and natural disasters, were pathetically insufficient against a coordinated military assault. Vexandra touched the central control node, and the holographic display shifted to show their remaining forces. 3 dozen patrol vessels, 5 orbital defense platforms, and a handful of converted civilian ships. Against the Crimson Horde's reported fleet of over 300 warships, it was a joke. There must be another way, she whispered. More to herself than the Council. The ancient archives, the old galactic databases. Surely someone out there can help us. Threnaxi's expression brightened slightly. The deep memory banks, records from the old expansion era, when our ancestors first mapped this region of space. Perhaps there are civilizations we have forgotten, species that might aid us. Begin the search immediately, Vexandra commanded. Cross-reference any entries for advanced civilizations, particularly those noted for military capability or humanitarian tendencies. We need someone willing and able to stand against the Horde. For hours, the ancient databases were combed through by the Council's best archivists. Most entries led to dead ends, civilizations that had fallen to time, species that had evolved beyond physical existence, or worlds that had simply vanished from the galactic community. The search seemed hopeless until a junior archivist named Kael'tos made a discovery that would change everything. Chancellor, he called excitedly from his workstation, I have found something. A species called humans, from a world designated as Earth. The records are incomplete, but they describe a young civilization with remarkable adaptive capabilities. Vexandra moved to examine the data. The entry was frustratingly brief, clearly a preliminary survey from the early expansion period. It described humans as a bipedal species with advanced technology for their age, noted for their rapid development and strong protective instincts. Most intriguingly, there were references to their role as guardians and defenders of the innocent. What military capabilities are mentioned? Asked Councillor Threnaxi, leaning over the display. Kael'tos frowned at the fragmentary data. Very little detail, sir. The survey mentions defensive installations and patrol fleets but describes them primarily as healers and protectors. It notes their tendency to offer aid to civilizations in distress. Perfect, breathed Vexandra. A species dedicated to helping others with sufficient technology to potentially provide assistance. What are their coordinates? The coordinates were ancient, but still readable. Earth lay in a spiral arm of the galaxy that had been largely unexplored by Zephyrian vessels, some 47 light-years distant from their homeworld. close enough to reach with their fastest courier ship, far enough to have remained isolated from the current conflict. "Prepare the emergency beacon," Vexandra ordered. "Full diplomatic protocols. Maximum power transmission. We will transmit our complete historical records, evidence of the Crimson Horde's atrocities, and a formal request for aid. Emphasize our need for medical supplies, refugee transport, and defensive technology." As the great transmitter powered up, focusing its beam toward the distant star system that harbored Earth, none of the Zephyrians considered that their incomplete records might have missed some rather important details about humanity. 47 light-years away, the Deep Space Monitoring Station Watchtower 7 maintained its lonely vigil at the edge of the Sol system. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, a 10-year veteran of the Terran Defense Force, was reviewing routine sensor logs when the communication array detected something unprecedented. "Commander Chen," she called to her superior. "We're receiving a transmission. Origin point is way outside our local group bearing 27 Mark 49. Signal strength is incredible. Whoever sent this really wanted us to hear it." Admiral Sarah Chen, a compact woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen more battles than she cared to remember, moved to the communication station. At 55, she was one of Earth's most experienced deep space commanders, having spent the last 20 years expanding humanity's reach into the surrounding star systems. "Play it back," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. The transmission began with mathematical constants and basic pictographs, establishing common ground for communication. Then came the deluge of information, historical records, star charts, and images of destruction that made even veteran military personnel wince. The Zephyrian language was complex, but Earth's translation algorithms, refined through contact with a dozen other species, began parsing the meaning. "They're asking for help," Santos reported, her voice tight with emotion as the images of devastated worlds filled her screen. "Medical supplies, transport vessels, defensive technology. They're facing complete annihilation from something called the Crimson Horde." Chen studied the tactical data embedded in the transmission. Ship counts, weapon capabilities, strategic positions. The Zephyrians had been thorough in their intelligence gathering. Even as their worlds burned around them, the picture that emerged was grim. A peaceful civilization being systematically destroyed by a superior military force. "Assessment, Lieutenant Commander?" Santos worked quickly, overlaying the alien star charts with their own navigational data. "Distance is manageable with our new hyperdrive systems. 3 days travel time for a fast courier, maybe a week for a full battle group. The civilization appears genuinely threatened. These images of planetary bombardment are consistent with the tactical patterns they describe." Chen nodded grimly. "And our interpretation of their request? Standard humanitarian aid package, I'd say. They're specifically asking for medical supplies and defensive technology, not military intervention. Their own record suggests they're pacifists, probably expecting us to help them evacuate or establish refugee camps." Chen's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence of the Crimson Horde's atrocities. Entire populations wiped out, worlds stripped of resources, civilian ships destroyed without mercy. It was the kind of systematic brutality that Earth had sworn to oppose wherever it was found. "Contact Fleet Command," she ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission. We have a first contact. Situation combined with an active genocide. I'm recommending immediate military response." "Admiral, they're not asking for military intervention," Santos pointed out carefully. "Their message specifically requests humanitarian aid." Chen's smile was cold as winter steel. "Lieutenant Commander, there's something these Zephyrians don't understand about humans. When someone asks us for help against monsters, we don't just send medical supplies, we send the Marines." The response came back from Fleet Command within hours. Admiral Chen was authorized to take the 3rd Battle Group, 15 warships including her flagship, the TDF Indomitable, to assess the situation and provide whatever assistance was deemed necessary. The politicians talked about humanitarian, mission parameters and diplomatic protocols, but Chen knew her people. The moment Earth's military saw those images of slaughtered civilians, the outcome was inevitable. Within 18 hours, the largest human fleet ever assembled for a deep space mission was powering up for departure. The Indomitable, a kilometer-long battle cruiser bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon, led a formation that included 6 destroyers, 4 heavy cruisers, and a full complement of support vessels. 15,000 of Earth's finest military personnel, equipped with weapons and tactics refined through centuries of human warfare. The Zephyrians had asked for bandages and medicine. They were about to receive the full might of the Terran Defense Force. As the fleet prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, reviewing the tactical data one final time. The Crimson Horde commanded over 300 ships, but they were about to learn something that countless enemies throughout human history had discovered the hard way. It wasn't the size of the dog in the fight that mattered, but the size of the fight in the dog. "All ships report ready for jump," came the report from her navigation officer. Chen nodded to her crew, men and women who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. "Signal the fleet. Operation Guardian Angel is authorized. Let's go. Show these Crimson Horde bastards what happens when you mess with innocent people in our neighborhood." The stars stretched into lines as 15 Earth warships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the hopes of a dying civilization and the fury of a species that had never learned to back down from a fight. The Armada arrives, 3 days. After the desperate transmission, the Zephyrian High Council waited anxiously for any sign of response from the distant world called Earth. Their situation had worsened considerably. Advanced scouts reported Crimson Horde forces gathering at the edge of their home system, preparing for what appeared to be a final assault on Zephyros Prime itself. Chancellor Vexandra stood at the observation deck of the orbital command station, watching refugee ships flee toward the outer planets. Her people had never been warriors, but they were not cowards either. Those who could fight remained to defend their homeworld, even knowing it was likely hopeless. "Chancellor," came the urgent voice of Communications Officer Lindara. "We're detecting massive hyperspace signatures at the system's edge, multiple contacts bearing directly for our position." Vexandra's heart sank. The Crimson Horde had arrived ahead of schedule. "How many ships?" 15 confirmed contacts, but Chancellor, these aren't Horde vessels. The energy signatures are completely different, and they're broadcasting identification codes that match the Earth civilization we contacted. For a moment, Vexandra couldn't speak. They had actually come. After 3 days of desperate hope mixed with growing despair, the humans had answered their call for aid. "Open a channel immediately. Prepare to transmit our current tactical situation and coordinate refugee pickup points." The main display activated, showing a view that made every Zephyrian in the command center freeze in shock. Instead of the small fleet of medical ships and transports they had expected, space around Zephyros Prime was suddenly filled with vessels that could only be described as warships. Massive angular craft bristling with weapon arrays, their dark hulls marked with symbols that spoke of military might. The lead ship was particularly impressive. Over a kilometer long, its sleek lines broken by dozens of gun turrets and missile ports. As they watched, smaller craft detached from the larger vessels, moving in precise formation patterns that spoke of military discipline. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," came a crisp voice over the communication channel. "We received your distress call and have arrived to provide assistance. Please identify yourself and provide current tactical status." Vexandra found her voice with difficulty. "Admiral Chen, I am Chancellor Vexandra of the Zephyrian High Council. We are grateful for your response, but I believe there may have been some misunderstanding. We requested medical aid and refugee transport, not military intervention." There was a pause before the human responded, and when Admiral Chen's voice came through again, there was something that might have been amusement in it. "Chancellor, when humanity receives a distress call showing evidence of genocide, we don't just send doctors. We send everything we have. What's the current status of this Crimson Horde? Before Vexandra could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the command station. Sensor Officer Krental's voice cut through the noise. Massive hyperspace emergence, bearing 187 Mark 45. It's the Horde's main fleet. Over 200 ships. On the tactical display, space near Zephyros Prime's fourth moon suddenly filled with crimson-hulled vessels. The Crimson Horde fleet was massive, a chaotic mixture of ship types from a dozen conquered species, all bearing the blood-red markings of their savage alliance. At their head rode the flagship Bloodfang, a monstrous dreadnought that had served as the grave marker for dozens of civilizations. Chancellor, Admiral Chen's voice carried calm authority despite the odds. I suggest you move your command staff to a safer location. We're about to give your friends a demonstration of human military doctrine. Vexandra watched in fascination and growing horror as the human fleet moved into combat formation. The 15 Earth ships arranged themselves in a complex three-dimensional pattern that placed the enemy fleet in a tactical box. It was an impressive display of coordination, but against over 200 enemy vessels it seemed like elaborate suicide. Warlord Scarthax of the Crimson Horde stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the small enemy fleet through predatory eyes. His species, the Varaxian, had evolved from pack hunters, and every aspect of his physiology spoke of violence barely contained. Rows of razor teeth filled his elongated jaw, while his forearms ended in claws capable of tearing through steel. These are the mysterious allies the Zephyrian summoned, he growled to his bridge crew. 15 ships against our grand fleet? They must be either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. His tactical officer, a nervous member of one of the Horde's client species, studied the sensor readings. My lord, their ships are of unknown configuration. Energy signatures suggest advanced technology, but the fleet composition doesn't match any known military doctrine. Scarthax laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Advanced technology means valuable salvage. Signal all ships. I want those vessels. Captured intact. The crews can be enslaved or eaten, depending on how they taste. The Crimson Horde fleet moved forward in their traditional wall formation, designed to overwhelm enemies through sheer mass and firepower. They had used this tactic to crush dozens of civilizations, and they saw no reason why these humans should be any different. That was their first mistake. Admiral Chen watched the enemy formation approach and allowed herself a tight smile. The Crimson Horde was using standard pack tactics, effective against disorganized defenders but predictable once you understood the pattern. Human military doctrine had evolved through centuries of facing similar strategies, and the solution was elegant in its simplicity. All ships, initiate pattern Delta 7, she commanded. Let's show them what concentration of force actually means. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions, moving with impossible coordination. Each ship took a vector that seemed random, but was actually part of a carefully calculated pattern. The Crimson Horde, expecting their enemies to meet them head-on, found themselves shooting at empty space as the Earth vessels used superior speed and maneuverability to avoid engagement. What are they doing? Scarthax demanded, as his weapons missed their targets. Are they running? His question was answered as the human ships completed their maneuver. Instead of a conventional battle line, the Earth fleet had formed a three-dimensional cage around the Horde's formation, with overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape vector. Suddenly, the Crimson Horde's numerical advantage became a liability as their ships found themselves trapped in a killing box. Admiral Chen's voice echoed across the battle space. Crimson Horde vessels, this is the Terran Defense Force. You are guilty of crimes against sentient life, including genocide, slavery, and systematic destruction of civilian populations. Surrender immediately, or face the consequences. Scarthax's response was to order his entire fleet to open fire. The space around Zephyros Prime lit up like a small star, as over 200 warships unleashed everything they had at the surrounding Earth vessels. Energy beams, missile swarms, and exotic weapons that had devastated countless worlds converged on the human fleet, and accomplished absolutely nothing. The Earth ships moved through the barrage like dancers, their defensive systems absorbing or deflecting everything the Horde could throw at them. Energy shields shimmered and sparked but held firm, while point defense systems intercepted incoming missiles with surgical precision. Not a single human vessel took meaningful damage. "Impossible," whispered Scarthax, watching his most powerful weapons fail against the alien technology. Admiral Chen's response was swift and devastating. All ships weapons free. Pattern Alpha Strike full power. The human fleet opened fire, and the Crimson Horde learned why humanity had been able to spread across dozens of star systems in just a few centuries. Earth weapons didn't rely on brute force. They relied on precision, efficiency, and an understanding of physics that turned every shot into a surgical strike. Particle beams, refined through decades of research into exotic matter, punched through Horde shields like they weren't. Their kinetic projectiles, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, delivered devastating kinetic energy with pinpoint accuracy. Missile swarms equipped with adaptive AI hunted down their targets with relentless persistence. In the first exchange, 23 Crimson Horde vessels were destroyed outright, while another 40 suffered crippling damage. The human fleet remained completely unharmed. Watching from the command station, Chancellor Vexandra could only stare in amazement. How is this possible? The Horde has conquered entire star systems with that fleet. They never faced humans before, came Admiral Chen's voice over the communication channel. Chancellor, you asked for medical aid because your records described us as healers and protectors. What your records failed to mention is that sometimes the best way to heal is to remove the disease. The battle continued for another hour, but it was never really a contest. The Crimson Horde had numbers, but humanity had something more important. They had experience. Centuries of human warfare had taught them that victory didn't come from having the biggest gun, but from using the right weapon at the right time, in the right way. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship perfectly coordinated with the others. They used the enemy's size against them, forcing the Horde ships to interfere with each other's targeting. They exploited weaknesses in enemy formations, created by species that had never learned to fight as a unified force. Most importantly, they never let emotion or bloodlust cloud their tactical judgment. By the time Warlord Scarthax finally attempted to surrender, his fleet had been reduced to fewer than 50 functional vessels. The space around Zephyros Prime was littered with the debris of Crimson Horde ships, while the Earth fleet remained completely intact. Crimson Horde flagship, this is Admiral Chen, came the human's voice as Scarthax knelt in defeat on his bridge. You will stand down all weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the immediate destruction of your remaining vessels. As human marines secured the defeated enemy fleet, Chancellor Vexandra found herself in the unusual position of trying to thank someone for completely misunderstanding her request. Admiral Chen, she said during their post-battle communication, I must admit when we asked Earth for aid, we expected medical supplies and refugee transport, not a complete military victory. Admiral Chen's response carried warmth that hadn't been present during the battle. Chancellor, there's something you need to understand about humanity. When we see innocent people being threatened by monsters, we don't ask how we can help. We ask how we can stop the threat permanently. Your people are safe now, and they'll stay safe as long as Earth has anything to say about it. The aftermath of the battle changed everything. Word of humanity's victory spread throughout the galaxy with incredible speed, carried by refugees and traders who had witnessed the impossible, a young species destroying one of the most feared military forces in known space. Within weeks, delegations from dozens of civilizations arrived at Earth, some bearing tribute, others requesting alliance, and many simply wanting to understand how such a thing had been possible. The Galactic Federation, which had spent months debating what to do about the Crimson Horde, suddenly found themselves scrambling to establish diplomatic relations with this new power. For the Zephyrians, the victory meant more than just survival. Working alongside human advisors, they began to rebuild their civilization with new strength. The humans shared their defensive technologies freely, but also taught something more valuable: the understanding that sometimes the only way to protect peace was to be prepared for war. Admiral Chen remained in the Zephyrian system for several months, overseeing the establishment of joint defense stations and training programs. The friendship between the two species grew stronger with each passing day, based on mutual respect and shared values. "You know," she said to Chancellor Vexandra during one of their planning sessions, "when your people sent that distress call, you probably thought you were just asking for help from some distant civilization." Vexandra's skin patterns shifted to show amusement. "And instead, we summoned Earth's entire armada to our rescue. I believe humans have a saying about getting more than you bargained for." Admiral Chen smiled. "That's us, all right. When humanity makes a promise to protect innocent people, we don't do it halfway. Your people asked for support, and now you have the full backing of the Terran Defense Force. The Crimson Horde was just the first lesson in what that means." As Earth's ships finally prepared to return home, leaving behind a permanent defense, garrison and the promise of lasting alliance, the galaxy had learned something important about humanity. They were indeed healers and protectors, as the ancient records had stated, but they were also warriors, and when threatened, they would bring the full weight of human determination to bear on any enemy foolish enough to challenge them. The Zephyrians had asked for aid, not knowing they were summoning the fury of a species that had never learned to back down from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. In the end, it was exactly what they needed.